What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. And before we get too far into this, I want to say that right as I'm going to start filming this, it started raining outside and there's some thunder, so maybe that might add to the atmosphere of this review, but if you hear some, that's what it is. And so recently I covered all of the Alien films, or at least the mainline Alien films, leading up to the release of Alien Romulus next week, and I mentioned that I wasn't going to be doing the Alien vs. Predator films just yet because I want to cover the Predator films that I've yet to cover here on the channel before then. So yeah, there's going to be a couple of videos that come out after Alien Romulus, but I wanted to focus on those original Alien films, or the mainline ones, first. And now let's get back to the Predator films that I've yet to cover. And so many of you may be thinking, all right, well, I've been following the channel, I've been following your Alien series of reviews. Where's your review for the first Predator film? It was actually the 28th video I ever did back in the day, which is crazy because now I'm well over 1,000 videos. I wasn't as comfortable when it came down to reviews. I was reviewing movies in my car because I didn't feel as comfortable sitting here in front of a camera with a microphone where my family could hear me around the house. So I've definitely gotten a lot more comfortable with doing this. I thought about doing a re-review with more of a modern sense of where I am today, but I kind of love that that's part of my history. And overall, while I didn't necessarily have the same skills that I have now when it comes to making videos, I still feel very similar about the film, and you can go back and check out that video. I think it'd be a lot of fun for you guys who enjoy my content now to maybe go see a video that you've never seen before. But today we're going to be talking about the next installment in that franchise, so without further ado, let's get into 1990's Predator 2. Directed by Hopkins, this film stars people like Danny Glover, Gary Busey, Ruben Blades, Maria Conchita Alonso, Bill Paxton, and many more. And before we get too much further into the video, I do want to say, for anybody who's wondering, so which films have you covered and have not covered in the Predator franchise? I've been a little bit all over the place. So I covered the original film, as I mentioned in the intro. It was one of my earliest videos here on the channel. I've also covered The Predator, which was the last theatrically released film in the franchise. And then I also covered the Hulu original film that came out called Prey, which is a prequel to the franchise. I think that may have gotten a limited theatrical release in some places, but it wasn't a wide release. It was more of a streaming release, so I don't count it as the last theatrical one. But yeah, those are the ones I've covered. So as far as going forward, I have this one, Predator 2, then Predators, and then we're going to get into the Alien versus Predator stuff. So I'm really excited to wrap up all of these movies. It's been a lot of fun to do the Alien films, and now it's fun to dip my toes back into another part of this franchise in a weird way, and that is Predator 2, which is directed, like I mentioned, by Hopkins, who actually directed the year prior my least favorite, or at least one of my least favorite Nightmare on Elm Street films, which is the fifth film, Dream Child. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's my least favorite, but it's definitely in my top 3 worst films in that franchise. Not a huge fan of him as a director on an overall level when I look at his filmography, but Predator 2 is a film that I watched before I really knew anything about directors, and I have some nostalgia for. As a kid, I used to think The Predator was so cool, and similar to the Alien films where I talked about the fact that Ridley Scott introduced us to one of the coolest movie monsters of all time, that original Predator film also introduced us to another one of the coolest aliens and monsters in movies of all time. And so going into this sequel, as a kid, I remember watching it when I was younger on TV all the time, and I just always loved seeing The Predator. Watching it today, though, as it has been quite some time since I had seen this film, yeah, this one is not that great. The first film is very over the top and machismo heavy. It's a movie that is very much a macho man action movie that has some thriller elements, is very over the top when it comes down to its gunplay and muscles, but is a fun and entertaining thriller with an alien at the center of it that these commandos have to find a way to try to destroy. In this second film, it feels like it's still trying to match that over-the-top element, but maybe goes a little bit too over-the-top at times. In some ways, though, it's almost an it's so bad it's good at times. There are moments of lines of dialogue or performance that are just so overblown and so over-the-top that you can't help but at least have a laugh at some of the lines of dialogue that happen in this movie and just some of the small moments between characters. So many characters are shouting left and right, and it's just absolutely hilarious. I feel like in some ways they were trying to match that level of over-the-topness that the first film had, but the first film at least made sense because you're focusing on a group of macho, heavy, muscular men that are all out there trying to be as macho as they can. They have the big guns, cigar in the mouth, like they're trying to be almost like a caricature, whereas here we take place in Los Angeles in what almost feels like something out of like a Ninja Turtles comic book or a cartoon. All of the villains and all the bad guys in here just feel like something out of an old cartoon that some ninjas would come out and pop their ass. Oh, that sounded weird. Why did I say that? But you know what I mean. And so yeah, it's one of those things where it just tonally is absolutely hilarious. All the bad guys in this movie, there's a bunch of gangs, they all look like something out of a cartoon. And so the base premise of this film is we are introduced to the fact that it takes place in LA this time around, and the movie opens up immediately with a big gang battle between the police and various gangs. And we learn pretty immediately that there are a lot of gangs in LA at this time, these big over-the-top various ethnic kind of gangs that are going around. And the biggest threat in the mix is the Jamaican Voodoo Gang, I believe is what they're called, which is hilarious. They make it a point to make them as stereotypically Jamaican as they possibly can, not only in the things that they say, but in the things that they do. They go out of their way to make it so abundantly clear that these guys are supposed to be Jamaican that it comes off almost racist, to be honest, but I think it's hilarious, to be honest. I don't think it necessarily is trying to be racist, but it's just so stereotypical that it's laughable, to be completely and utterly honest. And so they are the main threats, so to speak, in terms of these gangs. We learn there's a Colombian gang as well, and there's other gangs from different ethnicities that are just running rampant. The main cop that we're focusing in this movie, though, is Danny Glover's character of Lieutenant Mike Harrigan. He's kind of a hothead and is well known for being a good cop in terms of getting the job done, but tends to cut corners and doesn't really listen to commands and tends to do whatever he wants to, which usually ends up having him get in trouble. But the fact that he has such a good record of putting horrible people behind bars ultimately kind of keeps him from truly getting in trouble. Outside of him, we have a couple of other cops that we focus on here. You have the character of Danny Archuleta, played by Ruben Blades, as well as Maria Conchita Alonso as the character of Leona Cantrell, and then Bill Paxton's in the mix as Jerry Lambert. And I think it's kind of hilarious that these films kind of take place in the same universe, the Aliens and the Predator franchise, but then you have Bill Paxton in this movie. And there's a specific reason that this movie in particular really kind of cemented the fact that the Alien franchise and the Predator franchise take place in the same universe to some degree, and that is near the end of the film, but we're going to get into that in just a little bit. So yeah, the movie opens up, you have this gang war, and so immediately we start to see that the Predator is watching over this action that's going on. He's watching to see who is the biggest threat of the mix. And anytime somebody pokes their head out to be the biggest bad, the biggest threat, as we know with the Predator lore, they want to hunt that individual. They want to be able to take down and get the skull of the strongest individual on that planet, of that location. And so he's going around taking out various gang lords and drug lords throughout the course of the movie. In a lot of ways, this movie is very much a slasher. It feels like they took the action elements of the first film and kind of just crammed it into the last part of this movie, with majority of this film feeling more like a straightforward horror slasher, with the Predator being that said slasher. And so over the course of the movie, the Predator is taking out a bunch of bad guys that Mike Harrigan is going after, only for him to consistently be like, what is going on? What is causing all these brutal deaths? Why are there people being hung up and skinned? We need to figure out what this is. Over time, they eventually discover that there is something more going on under the surface. And a big reason for that is that there's a guy who's getting in the way of his operations, and that is a character of Peter Keyes, played by Gary Busey. He comes in just as the Predator arrives with a group of other individuals and tries to take over all of the various investigations and deaths that have to do with the Predator. Eventually, we end up learning that he's part of a secret organization. He is already familiar with Predator, and he knows that that alien exists because he's able to tell Mike Harrigan about the events of the first film and the fact that they've already come across a creature like this before. So you kind of have that Area 51 style kind of higher up that's coming into the mix to try to stop the alien invasion, and then the everyday cop that's just like, hey, I'm gonna deal with this myself. And so you kind of have that power struggle between the characters of Mike Harrigan and Peter Keyes throughout the course of the film, while the Predator is taking people out left and right. Overall, what I could say about this film is that there's fun to be had. I think that there are some really cool elements when it comes down to some of the kills in particular, which we're going to get into a little bit more as we talk about the Predator. But when it comes down to the overall story, it's pretty bare bones. There really isn't much here. It really is just a bunch of bad guys being taken out while they're being investigated, only for our main characters to find them absolutely decimated, wonder what's going on, and kind of take up the next lead to find some other bad guy end up being killed. Eventually, this all leads to a showdown between the character of Mike Harrigan with the Predator that we've been following throughout the course of the film, and a lot of the police officers that we follow throughout the course of the film unfortunately are taken out, like the character of Danny Archuleta, as well as the character of Jerry Lambert, played by Bill Paxton. And And yeah, you know, like I said, this is a slasher film, so there are some great moments of slashing in this movie. In particular, there's a scene with this Jamaican voodoo gang where they come in on a dude that's, I believe, part of the Colombian gang. He's there having sex with a woman in a very extreme manner. At least the girl's noises made it sound more extreme than probably it looked. And so yeah, once the Jamaican voodoo gang shows up there, the Predator shows up and destroys everybody in the room, hangs everybody up, and I really enjoyed the practical effects here. That's one thing about this film that I think really still held up, and that's something that was a big praise of the first film: practical effects. The effects that brought the Predator to life, similar to the Xenomorph being brought to life on screen, were without a doubt some of the most revolutionary at the time. The mask, the mouth moving on its own, you know, the overall look of the character, the design as a whole, without a doubt one of the coolest movie monsters of all time, and the practical effects are what made that so impactful. And so here in the sequel, when it comes down to a lot of the slasher kills in this movie, all of that I thought was really handled well. There's some of it that feels like a little bit cheesy, but I've always been a big appreciator of the practical effects and gore that we saw in the 80s and 90s. It was really kind of visceral and uncomfortable to look at sometimes, and oftentimes led to just being really impressive. It's impressive to the eye if you're a fan of behind the scenes makeup and various practical effect work. It's some of the coolest stuff in cinema, and it's a shame that we've moved away from it so much. So to watch a movie like this that has good practical effects is something that I can always really appreciate. And when you're speaking about the practical effects in this film, you kind of have to jump to the end of the film, where we really do have the final showdown between Danny Glover's character and the Predator. Gary Busey's character is in the mix here as well, alongside some of his other military men who are there trying to take out the Predator. They all end up getting taken out, and it really turns into a showdown between Mike Harrigan and that Predator. And I found it to be a lot of fun to watch, honestly. It was the most fun part of the movie, with a lot of the movie's narrative being very messy and all over the place. It was nice to kind of see the movie go back to what made the first film so awesome as well, was just fun, over-the-top action with a big movie monster and a hero who's willing to do everything and anything. And I think that Danny Glover really gives it his all here. While I don't necessarily think he's given the best lines of dialogue, which would be a criticism that I think all of the cast members unfortunately have to deal with in this movie, I think that he does a great job playing this cop who's just not going to give up, and he's not afraid to take out this alien and take him on face to face, which just makes him a really fun character to follow throughout the course of the film. While this film doesn't have a whole lot of memorable characters, lines of dialogue, and story ideas or plot points, what really does work is Danny Glover at the center here, and his ruthlessness when it comes down to figuring out what the problem is. They don't really spend a lot of time in this movie really trying to humanize him too much and get really underneath his skin, which is cool for plenty of movies. He's just a cool, ruthless, straightforward action hero. And you know, Danny Glover was much younger at this point, but you know, he was already kind of older at this point, you know, in his career, and he does a good job of just kicking ass throughout the course of this film. And I really enjoy the final action sequence between him and the Predator. Now, I mentioned before that there's a big part of this movie that ties it into the Alien franchise, and at the end of the film, right before the final moments where he's taking out the Predator, he finds himself at the Predator ship. He goes inside, he explores a little bit, and ends up discovering a trophy wall that they have that has a bunch of different skulls of various creatures and monsters that the Predators have killed, and one of them is the Xenomorph skull, which just confirms the fact that these two franchises are one, which again, it's kind of funny that Bill Paxton is in Aliens and also in this film and are not the same character, but I don't really think they thought about that level of continuity back then at that time. And so yeah, that's a really cool tease there for fans. This leads to the final fight between Mike Harrigan. Now they end up, you know, going in a full-on showdown, and Mike Harrigan ends up killing the Predator. Amidst doing this though, he starts to realize that there's some red lasers on him, only for him to realize that he is not alone, and all of the other Predators that were aboard this ship show themselves. One thing that's unfortunately not aged well with the first Predator or this film is the technology that was used to kind of create that invisibility cloak that the Predators have. It has not aged well all these years later. This is obviously in the very early days of computer generated kind of things. CGI as we know it really hadn't even properly been implemented into films yet. They were doing different kinds of, you know, computer generated tricks to kind of make some of these effects work. At the time, I can imagine it was far more effective, but at this point in the movies, it does come off really goofy. And there's what's meant to be a really cool sequence where we got really great practical effect makeup and costume work on all these Predators who are appearing in this final sequence, only for them to kind of like be standing in fog, and it just kind of looks really bad. It does not look great. The effects have not aged well there as they are kind of going from invisible to visible. But yeah, this is the cool kind of moment where then Mike Harrigan, even though he is surrounded by all these creatures, again, kind of highlighting how cool he is. His whole reaction to this is just kind of like, all right, who's next? Which I think is fantastic. You know, he's not afraid of these predators, or at least he's not worried about the fact that he's probably going to die. But we know that the Predators have some sense of honor, as we've seen in previous installments in the franchise. And so in the case of this movie, after he does kill the Predator that's been tasked for finding the strongest, you know, being or the alpha on Earth at that time, all the Predators show themselves, and then they leave. They kind of show him a sign of respect. They pick up the dead body of the Predator, and they go, and they're just like, you know, all right, well, you took out our guy. He was supposed to take you out. You know, you won the fight. We're going to let you go. And they end up giving him a pistol from the 1700s, and then they go on their way, and that's it. Danny Glover leaves and kind of has this cocky smile of like, hell yeah, I did that. And that's Predator 2. There really isn't an abundance to this movie to really break down when it comes down to narrative or theme, but overall, I think when it comes down to the action and the practical effects and the slasher elements, as a big fan of 80s, 90s slashers, there is fun to be had here for me, but I don't think this is a movie that a lot of people are going to love if they go back and revisit today. I think this is a movie that can easily be put near the bottom of the franchise for a lot of people, and while there is a nostalgic enjoyment of the film that I have, and I kind of enjoy how silly and over the top it is, I can still recognize that this is not a movie that's necessarily great. As soon as the movie ended and the credits started rolling, my wife, without hesitation, was like, yep, not great. And so, you know, that was her opinion, and I can't take that away from her. I think that is an incredibly valid opinion for somebody who doesn't necessarily have the nostalgia. But I do like the ties to the Alien franchise. I do like the practical effects, and so it at least kind of adds to it being an entertaining enough watch, just not one that I can see myself clamoring to revisit anytime soon again. So yeah, guys, I look forward to jumping into the next one, Predators, very soon. I hope you guys have been enjoying these videos. Sorry for the very, very long video, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Definitely leave your comments down below. Are you a fan of Predator 2? Where does this rank for you in the franchise? Whatever the case may be, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.